So when I was in college, I was studying computer science, and one of my big interests was in AI. I ultimately didn't specialize very much when it came to my computer science degree because I had just been introduced to the field and I didn't necessarily know where I was headed. But the two biggest areas of interest for me were AI and then human-computer interaction. And I started to take one AI course and dropped right out. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But as I've mentioned before on the channel, human-computer interaction, user interface, user experience, all of those things, human interface, as Apple calls it, are all great interests of mine. I feel very well equipped to talk about those things. And I also feel very well equipped to talk about the way that technology currently exists because I've been picking technology apart and using technology for my entire life. So that's all to say that I wanted to talk about OpenAI's GPT-4 Omni a little bit today. And I've been trying to write this video for like a whole week, but I'll keep it relatively short here because I just wanted to ramble a little bit. And ultimately, I want to hear your thoughts about things because I'm very curious about what the kind of reaction of the broader community is, because I've seen pockets of it and I've gotten interest from other people in my life about what's going on there, but it's not, the AI conversation is still very nascent. So let me start by saying this. GPT 4.0 is getting attention because the UX has improved greatly. Really, if you think about all the announcements that they made, the adjustable tone of the responses that it can give, the latency of the responses, the Mac app that they released, the multimodality, all of those things, there's bits of technology in there, but that technology mostly goes towards a user experience shift rather than a fundamental technological one. There's a lot of discussion about whether they would release GPT-5, and actually they tamped down those expectations before the announcement because the attention towards GPT-5 will explain a lot about what is actually, most likely will explain a lot about what's actually possible with this LLM, large language model technology. But GPT 4.0, from what I can see, what I noticed, spent a lot of time focusing on making things more accessible, more fluid, which you know that I love and appreciate. I kind of fundamentally think that AI is good for like a couple of things. One is summarization and one is translation. So a lot of people talk about generative AI because they think that it's like this creative thing, which is true to an extent, but I think that it tends to fall short. Nilay Patel always says that, from The Verge, always says that, it's kind of like C+ content that it spits out. But I think that summarization and translation are sufficient for some really profound experiences in user interface, which is why the kind of Rabbit R1 and Humane AI Pin events over the last couple months have been interesting things to observe, because they're computing platforms that are trying to use AI as the interface, right? And I think that's ultimately what these LLMs are good for, is as a user interface for a device, not necessarily as underpinning technology for the rest of it. So I wanted to compare a couple things: graphical user interfaces and AI interfaces, and kind of what they've done and just characteristics of each of them. So I've written down here, graphical user interface displays the available commands to a user, right? A button is just a command for a computer. It shows you what it can do. I forget what, somebody in the comments corrected me on my last AI video. It wasn't affordances, but signifiers. It has these signifiers for what you can do, for the affordances that the computer offers, the things that it can do. AI doesn't provide any signifiers, but what it can do is translate your commands into an available action that a computer can do, right? So instead of clicking on a button that tells me what it's going to do, I can kind of broadly gesture at something I want the computer to do, and AI can do its best to translate. Remember, that's one of the core uses that I think AI is good at, to translate that broad set of commands into a more specific set of ones. In that kind of realm, a command sometimes is actually like, if I ask a computer for something, or if I ask a human for something, usually that's actually a process that I'm asking it to carry out for me, right? So for a graphical user interface, those were usually predetermined, unless you were a power user or programmer or someone who could set up workflows for yourself, right? If I click on a button, the program does what I ask it to behind the scenes, which is ultimately a series of steps, right? But usually it's a little more rigid than like a human would be, who might be able to adjust things on the fly, or break down their understanding, or use subsets of skills to make something happen. AI turns that on its head a little bit, and it may be able to compose workflows of its own by translating a command into a series of steps. Now, this is something that I think it's not very good at yet, ultimately, and there's lots of questions around how good it can be at doing this thing. But I can see if it's good, again, if I think that AI is fundamentally good at summarization and translation, there's some of that translation that you can imagine turning a block of text or a command or a desire or multimodal input into a series of steps that might need to be carried out. That's fundamentally capable, the system is fundamentally capable of. The last thing I've written down here is that a graphical user interface, and actually ultimately a command line as well, and also just programming languages in general, talk about, they're very precise controls, right? I ask the computer to do something, it is documented, it gives that back to me, right? That's because humans have set these things up to do things in a predictable way, and we appreciate that predictability from a computer. If I ask it to do something, it will always do that thing for me. A common thing that people have seen with like voice assistants, for example, if I talk to this HomePod, if I talk to an Amazon Echo, for example, those things can change out from underneath you, and sometimes you ask it to do something and it can't do it anymore, right? Which is something we don't expect, and it's frustrating, right? But that lends into this other characteristic, whereas graphical user interfaces allow precise control, relatively speaking. An AI interface is kind of a lot more fuzzy in what it allows us to control. So we've talked about input resolutions in the past, right? In that case, with the graphical user interface in general, like a mouse is more precise than a finger. Well, the same is true at a broader level, that I think that a graphical user interface as a concept is generally more precise than an AI interface is, at least right now. So, a reminder here, the Rabbit R1, the Humane AI Pin were attempts at creating AI interfaces. Both have largely fallen on their face by basically the entire tech press. They're attempts at it, but they never really did the hard work of underpinning that interface with capabilities that it could do, that the interface could enable, right? The graphical user interface, for example, wasn't profound because it could paint a picture on a screen, right? It was profound because it could do that and enable complex use cases by the end user and adapt it to them and provide those complex use cases, those powerful capabilities after years and years and years of work, frankly, right? The graphical user interface without functionality is just a picture, right? There's really nothing profound about it. So then the other side of the coin here is about what Google is doing, right? So the phrase that I think Casey Newton has talked about from Platformer that he highlighted is that Google said, let Google do the Googling for you. And what that phrase ultimately means is that a bot should do the surfing of the web for you, right? Because the whole Google event this week was about basically abstracting away the web, because they're going to include AI-generated search results in on Google.com, right? Now, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm just rambling at this point, but like there's a lot to unpack there. But what I have written down here is Google taking that quality answer is a great example, and trying to like generate an answer based off of your search is a great example of the AI interface and what is required in order to make that AI interface good. So this is what I have written down. quality of an answer depends on the quality of the content that it surfaces. So this is why search is still key for them, right? Second, quality of that content surfaced depends on the quality of the content produced on the web, right? If you can't find, if there's no quality content on the web and it's not easy, or at least easy enough to find for Google, or it's drowned out by a flood of content that is not good, well, guess what? Google's going to have a hard time surfacing that. We've kind of seen that with the current search product. Third, quality content on the web requires quality information produced, right? So quality content isn't just about how things look or what's going on, but like it's actual creative act of creating something good. And remember, AI is not very good at the actual creation part of things, at least in my opinion. And then finally, fourth, I say that quality information produced requires something more than what that AI can do, which is what I just said, right? So therefore, given those kind of four ideas, which all follow from each other, something has to create quality content in the end. And in my eyes, that's the human. So if we go back to our discussion about the graphical user interface, remember, the interface actually was just an amplification, a very clear, predictable amplification of the actions that the user was taking. In that way, the same way that a paintbrush provides me immediate feedback, and I know how it will behave most of the time, that enables me to be creative. And I think that that's kind of a fundamental thing that a graphical user interface is good at, that an AI interface is not very good at right now. Now, I think that AI interfaces, right, ultimately can, while they may not be great at creativity on their own or enabling creativity inherently on their own, they can help speed up creativity, but not replace it entirely, right? I say this because I use AI all the time for these videos, right? I use it to like bounce ideas off of. I use it to help me do research, right? Boil things down, summarize, and translate, right? But notice that that's missing that final piece, which is combining all of those things into something new, which is effectively what you as a human being add, what you give back, to the pool of human existence, your creative personal perspective. And because AI right now, it doesn't feel like it has like a soul of its own. I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but because it doesn't feel like it has a unique perspective of its own, it is, in my eyes, struggling to have that additional creative contribution back to society. And that may change over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, right? It probably will. So it's all to say that I think that humans' hard work is still going to be really necessary. And I guess kind of bringing it all the way back to the beginning, talking about the GPT-4 Omni, I will continue using it for summarization and for translation to help me pare things down, combine ideas, ask questions of it. But on its own, I don't think it has the capability of doing anything profound over the previous model for me, right? I'm very excited to try the kind of multimodal input, right? But ultimately, again, that's a user interface change rather than a fundamental technology one.